am incredibly grateful for the really kind introductions that I've heard. Lori's just setting up the slides here. I have to say, looking at the program today, I'm incredibly excited to be here. I think it's really a reflection of what a vibrant autism community that we have in Edmonton and Alberta and beyond. It's amazing to see so many autistic people, family members, clinicians, community leaders, and many people who wear multiple hats. I think the most gratifying part of being in this role at the Glenrose and with the support of the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation is to have a chance to spend time with you and hear about the amazing work that people are doing. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous effort that's gone into organizing this conference. It's been ongoing for a number of years. The whole team has contributed, but really a special shout out to Dr. Lonnie Zwaigenbaum, who's put together a program. Lori's told me that we actually have over 700 people registered online participating, which is by far sort of the most that we've had to participate. And looking at the speakers today, I think it's going to be just a tremendous program. So I have the privilege of working with the folks at the Research Center, with the support of the foundation, and of course with many of you. And also the privilege of giving a bit of an overview of some of the highlights of the past year related to the work of the Autism Research Center. Sorry. Thank you. Great. So again, a huge shout out to the foundation. Without the foundation, none of this work would be happening. I first moved to Ontario to Edmonton in 2006, and it was largely through the support of the hospital and the foundation that really created that opportunity. And I've had this really generous support through the endowed chair for a number of years, and that's really supported a lot of the research activity that you'll be hearing about, and specifically this conference today, which, as Lori said, would not have been possible to be able to offer it to our diverse community without. Speaking of that diversity, I love how Lori opened the conference. I think all of us will sort of express different preferences around language usage. Personally, I follow the lead of autistic people. There are many autistic adults who really emphasize the importance of identity first language and how autism is such an intrinsic part of who they are. So that is a convention that I'll be using. I also kind of personally experienced and sort of got the sense around the room that a bit of uncertainty around applause, and sort of in a number of autism spaces that I now participate in, I think the convention is to kind of do a kind of more of a visual representation of appreciation, but recognizing that there are people with different sensory preferences, kind of both in the room and online. So in the next slide, I'll say that I think probably the things that I'm most excited about in relation to the past year of the Autism Research Center. So I've been like incredibly blessed to work with the most amazing research trainees over time. And I'm really excited to congratulate both Grant Bruno, who completed his PhD in the past year and has gone to a leadership role with the Ispameka Wasasik program, Sky Children program through the Women's and Children's Health Research Institute. And you'll be hearing Grant present on his groundbreaking work today. And I'm also absolutely delighted and proud to let people know that Nicholas Parati also successfully defended his master's thesis today, continues to have a major role within the Autism Research Center, helping support and lead many of the research programs that we'll be hearing about. I think that it's exciting to be at the stage of a career when the most exciting work that's happening that I'm connected to is actually being led by other people, and very much being led by the current generation of researchers who are continuing to change the world. And both Grant and Nicholas really bring this unique blend of creativity and insight and passion, as well as a deep personal connection to the work that they do. I'm also really excited to share that Dr. Lonnie Zwaigenbaum, who organized the day, Lori's background is in neuroscience. She's really been the brains behind the operation for many years. And in addition to all the research work that Lori does, she also completed her registration as a clinical psychologist. So I'm really delighted to welcome her as a clinical colleague as well. All right, so I'll give a few tidbits from the various studies that are ongoing. So as Jordana said, particularly kind of at an earlier stage in my career, very much the focus was on early detection and support for autistic children and families from the earliest stage of life. And that's very much the focus of ongoing work supported by the foundation. One of the major lines of research is focused on younger siblings of autistic children. Knowing that autism runs in the family, it's a unique opportunity to work with families, support families, and monitor some of the earliest signs as they first emerge. One of the important findings of our group in collaboration with our international colleagues is a bit of an update about kind of how often autism occurs actually among younger brothers and sisters. The Baby Sibs Research Consortium is an international partnership that had published on this about 13 years ago and collectively looked at a larger group of families that have been followed and updated the numbers. So the main finding is that currently about 1 in 5 younger siblings of autistic children will ultimately be diagnosed with autism as well. I mean, it's interesting that over that period of 14 years, that recurrence rate didn't change tremendously compared to, say, the change in the overall rate of autism in the general population, which has gone sort of, I think, over that period of time, probably from about 1 in 200 to about 1 in 50. Probably the most important finding coming out of this updated work is recognizing that the overall rate of autism is more similar now in younger sisters compared to younger brothers. So in the general population for many years, despite all the changes in autism, there's been about 4 boys diagnosed for every girl. Within the sibling study, where children are getting similar amount of attention, so in some respects, it's a more equitable process that doesn't rely on community referrals. It's about 2 boys to every girl. And among the girls, it's quite remarkable that in contrast to sort of the current evidence base, the features among girls are actually relatively similar to those among boys, including language and intellectual ability. I mean, there are subtle differences that I think sort of mirror differences in the general population, but it really emphasizes sort of how much work we need to do to make sure that young girls and frankly older girls and women in the general community have an opportunity to have their needs recognized and have a pathway to diagnosis. I'm excited that Emily Hotez from UCLA will be presenting on this topic later this morning. Another important line of research related to the infant sibling study is an innovative program that's designed to help parents support the early development of their children who are showing early features of autism. So social communication differences, sort of intense interests, sensory differences. This is a program that's been led by Dr. Jessica Bryan, was co-conceived and developed by Dr. Susan Bryson, and Dr. Isabel Smith has played an important role. And locally, Sana Gilderda has really championed this program. It's been exciting to see this program progress from sort of the focus in the lab to community implementation. It's actually now the provincial program in Prince Edward Island, and we're hoping we'll continue to sort of have broader implementation. Because of its focus on parent coaching, it's a highly scalable program, and in part stimulated by the pandemic, there's now sort of a virtual approach that allows families in more remote communities to participate. Related to the sibling study is a new research program that I spoke about briefly at our last conference, but we're kind of currently sort of actively inviting families to participate. So in contrast to the original sibling study, where we were inviting families who had an autistic child to bring in their kind of newborns, so the sisters and brothers of autistic children, now we're actually looking at the nieces and nephews. So often the family constellation is that there's a young adult who grew up with an autistic sibling and is now starting their own family, and may also have questions about sort of whether their child would benefit from that kind of monitoring. So the specific questions are the clinical features of those nieces and nephews similar to what we've seen over the years in the younger siblings? And also importantly, recognizing that the parents of those infants have kind of a unique connection to autism, sort of having grown up with an autistic sibling. We're really interested in the perspective about how they want to be engaged in conversations about early features, how to invite their questions, sort of how to share information about emerging features, and what their preferences are around being offered early supports. Maybe I don't include that there. I think in the previous one, I include a QR code, kind of shameless plug for our studies. It's also printed out at the front, but I do want to emphasize that we're delighted to welcome nieces and nephews of autistic people, and with an opportunity to follow them with kind of regular check-ins, opportunities to hear what parents' questions and concerns are. The next broad line of research is kind of longitudinal studies. So when autistic children are diagnosed for the first time, there are many questions that lay ahead about what the future holds. The Pathway study for the past 20 years has worked with a group of families who've kindly agreed to spend time with us at a number of different sites across Canada, and sort of really looking at how features of the child, but also characteristics within the family and within the community and the broader set of supports and services kind of shape the development and experience of those young people who are now reaching young adulthood. One particular paper that came out of this project over the past year was looking at emotional regulation over time and its relationship to mental health. There's a statistical approach that's been applied to the data that's come out of the Pathway study over the years. It's quite a large number of families that have participated, about 500 currently. So there's an opportunity to look at not only individual diversity, but whether there's actually subgroups of children that sort of follow a similar pattern over time. So based on this particular analysis, the statisticians found there are kind of roughly 3 groups with different levels of challenge related to emotional regulation. It's interesting to see that although there are some ups and downs along the way, there's relative sort of stability actually in the level of emotional regulation challenge from the time the children are diagnosed at 2 to 4 to this follow-up point, which is at about 11 years old. I think one of the important things that came out of this is that factors associated with persistent dysregulation are not necessarily things that we tend to think about clinically, like the scores on an autism assessment tool, or language level, or intellectual level or level of function, but rather factors that are important for families in the broader community. So families that experience challenge related to lower household income, families in which there's a level of depression among a caregiver, and also where there may be conflict among the caregivers. So I think 2 really important things related to that. First of all, these are family stresses and challenges that are often identifiable at the point of diagnosis. So we also have learned through this longitudinal study that high levels of dysregulation, even in the preschool years, are associated with significant mental health issues as the kids get older. So there's real continuity in terms of that. I think as clinicians, often we wait for those mental health issues to emerge before offering supports. The insight from this data is really for those families who are kind of experiencing challenges related to mental health, conflict, who are economically disadvantaged. It's those families that should actually be offered those kinds of mental health and general supports at a much earlier stage, with the possibility of buffering the challenges related to dysregulation and mental health. And this type of finding really feeds into a broader insight that I'm sure won't be a surprise to most of the people in the room, but I think is a bit of a surprise to I think many of us autism researchers have been so focused on studying autism as a diagnosis or disorder that we've forgotten that what we're studying is not a diagnosis, but rather a group of people. So the whole purpose of research is really to improve the opportunities and well-being of autistic people. And this is a good reminder that that things that shape the lives of autistic people are the things that shape the lives of the general community. And these social determinants of health are incredibly important in terms of shaping development, well-being, and opportunities. And many autistic people face significant disparities and disadvantages that put them at higher risk for this kind of disadvantage in terms of these social determinants. There was a paper that a few of us within the Pathway Study participated in the past year, kind of really emphasizing the importance of focusing on that broader context in understanding the needs of autistic people and not sort of coming in with just a narrow clinical lens. Expanding on the work of Pathways, there's a new perspective or longitudinal study of newly diagnosed autistic children, kind of following a similar approach as Pathways, but trying to take a more kind of inclusive approach, kind of shifting a lot of the assessments to online to make it easier for families who live outside of major university centers to participate. And also making sure that families get sort of more regular feedback, sort of on the broad range of measures that are being used. Another important feature here is that there is actually at least one site in Northern Ontario that's completely distant from kind of a large urban center. And again, with the idea of trying to focus on sort of a greater diversity of autistic children and understand their needs over time. And again, this is a study that's open for participation. There's no cost, and it is an opportunity for families with newly diagnosed autistic children to sort of receive some feedback along the way about how things are progressing with respect to kind of how they're learning, in particular sort of day-to-day functional skills and the impact that supports and services can have. And finally, our research is focused from simply describing the features and hoping that will help community clinicians learn about assessment and lead to earlier diagnoses, to really thinking about how we can sort of more directly support and create partnerships with community professionals, so that there's kind of more easy. So it's easier for families and autistic people to access that expertise kind of closer to home, and in particular, starting with a group of pediatricians, but with the hope of expanding to the primary care community. This work has used the ECHO model. ECHO stands for Extension of Community Health Outcomes. It's kind of a deceptively simple model that a great group of people through the Glenrose, as well as many people in the community, are now participating in. It's done on Zoom. Folks kind of bring in kind of a particular clinical scenario or case to talk about. But the thing that's different from a usual telehealth approach is that that the participants in the community, rather than just listening in, do actually most of the heavy lifting in terms of sharing their expertise, asking questions that may be relevant, and providing recommendations. And because the participants tend to be highly interdisciplinary, it's a much richer and holistic approach for community practitioners to learn than simply learning from a single so-called expert. And our focus has been both on building capacity in diagnosis and also supporting healthcare. As part of this project, we're collaborating with a number of colleagues across Canada, including Dr. Mel Penner, who's a developmental pediatrician in Toronto. And the program of evaluation for ECHO is now supported through a large national grant. As part of this, and kind of with Nicholas's support, we interviewed a number of community pediatricians about sort of how they perceive their role in this kind of partnership, and in particular, sort of what it would take for them to be involved in autism diagnosis. I think often as people who work in a specialty clinic, our assumption is that it's mostly about kind of sharing knowledge, like what do you look for, what questions do you ask, what assessment tools to use. But the feedback that we largely get from community practitioners is that while they appreciate that continuing education, the thing that really gets in the way is the practicality of incorporating comprehensive autism diagnostic assessments into a busy community practice. And it's really encouraged us to think more specifically about how do we provide sort of just-in-time training and support so that health professionals who take this on in the community feel that they can start doing the work, but that we also have their backs, that they can also turn to us for guidance over time. And how do we create an assessment pathway that fits into a busy community practice? How do you schedule it? What materials are needed? How do you work with families and autistic champions to really sort of expand the program? As part of that work, we've been fortunate in the past year to receive support through a Catalyst grant through a research program called One Child, Every Child that's based in Calgary, that is really focused on learning more and more about what it's going to take to build this capacity into the community, so that autistic children and hopefully eventually autistic adults won't have to wait on long wait lists for an assessment in a specialty center, but rather can sort of receive an assessment closer to home and ideally in their own medical home. So there are sort of two broad research projects sort of within this program. One is focused on evaluating our general pediatrician support and training process, understanding sort of what those pediatricians' needs are, how families experience the diagnostic process. Our colleague, Dr. Sabrina Eliason, and I just sort of had an open call for pediatricians who wanted to receive this diagnostic training. And we had 20 pediatricians who were willing to take this on, but we recognize that it's only the first stage, and actually getting them to the finish line in terms of the support that they need to actually build this into their practice in a sustainable way. And then Grant, as part of his research, is looking specifically about how do you create this capacity in a community and family-centered way within Indigenous communities, and specifically what are families looking for in terms of the diagnostic process, including the importance of community and culture, and as well what clinicians, both Indigenous as well as clinicians from outside of the Indigenous community, what their perspectives are on the work to make sure that Indigenous families across Canada and Indigenous individuals will be able to access a diagnostic system that's really aligned to their needs. So thank you for the opportunity to share some of this work. I'm grateful to all the folks that make this possible through the Research Center. I was realizing as we were putting together these slides that we need to get outside for a new group photo. We actually have a new research assistant, Sarah, who's just joined us this morning. She's incredibly brave on her first day of the job. She's kind of joining and participating in this conference. So welcome, Sarah. We need to get Nicholas and Grant's pictures, but you'll be seeing and hearing from them soon. And I'm also delighted to Amber Evans, who's providing administrative support to the center as well. Again, huge thanks to the foundation for supporting this work, to our other funders, and also to all of you and our community partners who make this possible through your support and participation now and over the years. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Lonnie.